Hi friends, welcome to Beautifully Bookish Bethany, where I have new videos every week about books and the geeky mom lifestyle. In today's video, I'm going to be wrapping up all the books that I read in the month of October. So, I have to tell you, October was a freaking fantastic reading month. I mean, you saw a lot of this if you saw my mid-month wrap-up where I was just gushing about so many of the books that I read, and the second half of October has continued to be really, really strong. I also read a lot this month. This was one of my highest reading months of the year, and I was just having a really good time with a lot of what I was reading, and so yeah, it's been great. Also, as of the end of October, I have just barely passed 300 books read for 2020, which is wild. The last 2 years in a row, I hit about 300 right at the end of the year. This is the earliest I've ever hit it. And then my husband, because I tell him this, and he's like, oh, maybe you could get to 365, and and I'm like, yeah, I could do a video, like, I read a book for every day of the year, which would be wild. I'm not, like, necessarily trying to do that, but also, if that happens, that could be kind of cool. We'll see what happens. That said, I have a lot of books to talk about, and one thing to note too is October was the final month of the Audible Escape package, which was a romance add-on package that Audible has discontinued. So because of that, I think I listened to 6 books from that, just trying to get through some of the stuff that had been on my TBR from Audible Escape before it went away at the end of the month. So know that there is a lot of romance coming in this, but I have plenty of other books as well, if romance is not your deal. With that said, if you are new to my wrap-ups, the way that I do these is I start by talking about all of my stats for the month, and then I talk about all of the books that I read, starting with my DNFs, my lowest rated books, moving up to my highest rated books. I did talk about 15 of these books in detail in my mid-month wrap-up, so for this video I'm just going to be telling you what it is and telling you the star rating. If you want to hear more detailed thoughts on those books, you can check out my mid-month wrap-up, which I will link up above. With that said, we have a lot to talk about, so let's go ahead and dive into my stats. So I said I read a lot of books this month, and I did. In October, I read 34 books. Yeah. I think my highest this year has been 36, but 34 is really high, for a total page count of 11,192 pages. That does include my audiobooks. Pretty wild. It's a lot of books. This month I DNF'd 2 books. I did not have any rereads. 22 of the books that I read this month were either ARCs or books that were sent to me for review. That number, the longer I'm on this platform, the higher that number seems to get in general. This month I did not read any translated books, I did not read any graphic novels, and I read 8 indie books. A lot of this is romance. Most of that is indie romance with Audible Escape, so we will talk about that. And I did listen to a good number of audiobooks. This month I listened to a total of 16 audiobooks, and 6 of those were what I term shelf, which means that I had physical copies of those books and I got them off my TBR via audio. In terms of where those audiobooks are coming from, this month 3 of them were from my library, 7 of them were from Audible, and 6 of those 7 were Audible Escape books, so that's why that number is so high this month. 2 of them were from Scribd, 2 of them were from Libro FM, and if you guys want to check out Libro FM, they are linked down below. They're similar to Audible, but their proceeds go to support indie bookstores, so I think that's a great option if you're an audiobook listener. I had 1 audio review copy from the Penguin Random House Volumes app and 1 audio review copy from the new NetGalley app. With that said, let's go ahead and talk about the age breakdown. This month I read predominantly adult titles. Like I said, it was a lot of romance, a lot of adult romance. 26 of the books that I read this month were targeted at an adult audience. 8 of the books that I read were targeted at a YA audience, and I did not read any middle grade this month. Next, let's look at some stats about publication date. This month, the earliest publication date of a book that I read was 1953. 9 of the books that I read were published prior to 2020. 24 of the books that I read were published in 2020, and this month I read my first 2021 release of the year. So I had one book that's going to be published in 2021. This is one that actually was originally supposed to be published this month, and it did get pushed back. Then let's look at author demographics. In terms of race and ethnicity, it's holding pretty steady, where a little less than half of what I'm reading is coming from non-white authors, and this month about 56% of the books that I read were coming from white authors, with everything else coming from a mix of different author backgrounds, which I'm pretty fine with. I would like to have it be at least half of my reading every month is more diverse. This month about 18% of the books that I read were written by queer authors, which again I'm fine with. I think last month I had a particularly high number. I think something like 30% of the books that I read were by queer authors, which was unusually high. But in general, I'm pretty happy with how this is going, and I like doing the stats because it helps keep me aware of the books that I'm picking up. Moving on, let's talk about genre. As I said, I read a lot of romance this month. In October, 16 of the books that I read were romance titles, and in terms of subgenres, 5 of those were contemporary romance, 6 of them were historical romance, and 5 of them were speculative romance. And if you're wondering what speculative romance is, this is going to be anything that's your fantasy romance, paranormal, sci-fi, all of that is kind of bundled together under speculative. My next highest genre this month was fantasy. I read 8 books in the fantasy genre. I read 5 horror novels, which seems appropriate given that it was October. Then I read 1 contemporary fiction, 1 nonfiction, 1 poetry, 1 sci-fi, and 1 thriller. Okay, so lastly, let's go ahead and talk about my star ratings. Like I said, I had a really good reading month, and you can tell by these star ratings. This month, I did not give out any 1 or 1.5 stars. I had 1 book that got 2 stars, 2 books got 2.5 stars, 4 books got 3 stars, 3 books got 3.5 stars, 10 books got 4 stars, 2 books got 4.5 stars, 8 books got 5 stars, and 4 books got 6 stars. Guys, I am so happy. I had a 2-month streak with no 6-star ratings, and for those who are new on my personal rating scale, a 6 star is what I give to a book that I consider a favorite of the year or a favorite of all time. I had 2 months straight with 0 6 stars, and this month I had 4 of them, so I am thrilled. Totally broke that, which is great. All right, with that said, let's go ahead and talk about all of the books that I read. I will start with my DNFs. I had 2 of them this month, and then we'll talk about books from lowest rated to highest rated. So I had 2 books that I DNF'd near the beginning of the month. I talked about both of these in my mid-month wrap-up, so if you want to hear about why I DNF'd them, check out that video. But those 2 books are Shit Actually by Lindy West and Courting the Coronavirus by Lee Taylor. Check out my mid-month wrap-up if you want to hear more about why I DNF'd them. All right, so we're going to start with my 2-star read. There was 1 book that I gave 2 stars, and I read it in the second half of the month. This was a romance novella that I picked up as part of this project of trying to find good fat rep in romances for you. Clearly I was not the biggest fan of this one, but some people might like it better than I did. This is called His Curvy Enemy by Piper Sullivan. I got this on Kindle, and it might be part of Kindle Unlimited. I'm wondering if maybe I should just do a trial of Kindle Unlimited because I'm starting to actually read a little more, but I was like, is it worth it though? Because I don't read that much. I mostly read e-arcs on my Kindle. I don't know. It's a thought. But this is a rivals to lovers novella where the main character is a curvy woman who runs a matchmaking agency, and the hero is a guy who does a podcast for single guys who says that romance isn't real and true love isn't real, and so they end up with this bet that she can't find him somebody to fall for. So that's kind of the basic setup of it, which I was like, that sounds fun, and it was fine. I didn't find it to be super believable, and I don't know. It just was like, it's okay. I think my biggest issue with this too is I feel like it really failed on delivering the curvy or fat rep that it promised. The cover is great. The way that it was handled in the book was less so. The way she's described is a lot more like Kim Kardashian curvy than like actual normal human curvy, so I don't know. Yeah, 2 stars. Not my favorite. It's fine. Next, I had 2 books got 2.5 stars, and I did talk about both of these in my mid-month wrap-up. Those books are The Last Angel Warrior by John W. Wells III and Once Upon a Winter's Eve by Tessa Dare. If you want to hear more detailed thoughts, check out my mid-month wrap-up. Then I gave 4 books 3 stars, and one of them I talked about in my mid-month wrap-up. That book is The Hellion by S.A. Hunt. Again, check out that video if you want to hear more detailed thoughts on this one. I also gave 3 stars to Play of Passion by Nalini Singh. This is one of the books in the Psy Changeling series, and you are going to see more of those coming, because I think I listened to 3 of them this month, if I'm not mistaken, as part of this Audible Escape package thing. My least favorite of the bunch was this one, Play of Passion. It was fine, the romance was okay, and the sort of larger world plot elements were less exciting than they usually are, but you know, it's a Psy Changeling book. I still enjoyed it reasonably well. Not a favorite, but it was fine. Then I also gave 3 stars to A Princess by Christmas by Julia London. This is the 3rd book in a series from her that I've been reading that I've had kind of mixed experiences with, so I don't know. I gave 5 stars to the first book. I gave 1 star to the second book. This one was 3 stars. So like, do I recommend the series? I don't know, guys. This one was perfectly fine. It's a holiday romance with a secret identity royal, and you know, I liked it, but I felt like it was very slow to get going. It really needed some editing in the earlier part of it. And it was also sort of weird to me because literally you know from the description of the book that the hero whose perspective we're getting is secretly a prince, but in the book it acts like it's a secret for like half of it, which got to be really irritating. So this was fine. I really liked the back half of the romance quite a bit, but the earlier part of it dragged and then had some like irritating things. So I gave this one 3 stars. And the last book that I gave 3 stars this month was The Cyborg Tinkerer by Meg Latour. This was kindly sent to me by Meg for review. She is the creator of the iWriterly channel, so she's an author tuber, and this is her debut novel. It is a sci-fi steampunk polyamorous romance with a cyborg circus. So this sounded right up my alley, and there was a lot that I really liked about this, but it definitely wasn't perfect. I do think there are people, if they go in with the right expectations, who could have a really good time with this, and I certainly wouldn't steer you away from it, but I do think it could have been a stronger book with some changes. I have a pretty detailed Goodreads review for this one. If you guys want to check it out, my Goodreads is always linked down below, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here just because we have so many books to cover, but I think in general, I wish that this had picked one thing. I think it tried really hard to be both a steampunk sci-fi adventure with lots of twists and turns and plot elements and be a polyamorous romance, and I think it was trying to do too much and ended up not doing either of those 2 things the justice they deserved. I think the world here is really cool. There's a lot conceptually that I liked, and it does get quite steamy. As a genre romance, do I believe the HEA relationship for these characters? No, maybe not so much, but this was definitely pretty easy to get through. It's very action-packed, very fast-paced. However, again, because we're doing so many things, there's some stuff that gets glossed over that end up reading kind of like plot holes. I don't know if they actually are plot holes, but it just very quickly skips over important things. So I don't know. It was an interesting experience. I think the cover is fantastic. I do think a lot of people will probably have fun reading this. It's not a bad book, but yeah, anyway, so those were my thoughts on this. If you want to hear more details, do check it out. There are quite a lot of content warnings, and this gets quite brutal as well. There's a lot of violence and other things, so if you need trigger or content warnings, check out the Goodreads review. But thank you so much to Meg for sending me a copy. This was great. And she sent me also, it's got this cool like character art. So this is our main character. It's cool. So it was fun. I had a good time with it, and I'm curious to see where the rest of it goes. I think a lot of people will enjoy it. Just don't go in expecting like something to sort of blow your socks off. But I do think for a self-published first novel, it's not bad. Next, I had 3 books that got 3.5 stars, and I talked about one of those in my mid-month wrap-up. That book is The Merriest Magnolia by Michelle Major. Again, check out my mid-month wrap-up if you want to hear detailed thoughts. I also gave 3.5 stars to The Mirror Broken Wish by Julie C. Dow. This is one that was sent to me for review. There was a lot that I really liked about this. It wasn't perfect, but I do want to continue on with the series. This is the first in a kind of cool new 4-book series that's coming out through Disney Books, and each book is going to be published by a different YA author. Julie is publishing the first one, and the second one is going to be by Danielle Clayton, coming out sometime in 2021. What's fun about this is the series follows a family with a curse, and each book follows a different generation of that family. So this one is setting up a lot of the foundation of the curse and the family and where it all comes from. And there was a lot that I really liked about this. I think it's super interesting and thematically really rich. I will say that while I loved the first third of this book and just was completely sucked in and kind of obsessed with it, the second 2/3 of it, we get a shift in who our main character perspective is, and I liked it, but I didn't love it as much. And I think a lot of that is the audience, that I think most of this book, especially the later part of this book, is really targeted at a teen audience. And so I think some of the things that irritated me as an adult reader probably wouldn't have bothered me so much if I was actually a teenager reading it. So just kind of an FYI, depending on how much that bugs you, you might want to know going in. I did think this was really interesting. It's set in 1800s Germany. The first part of it, the perspective is from the mother of the teen girl who's going to end up being our main protagonist. I don't want to give too much away either, because I feel like this is one you should go in not knowing too much, but I think my main issue with the later part of it is there's a character, this witch, who is, you know, an older woman, even if she looks young, and her kind of behavior and choices and the way she approaches things read to me more like a teenager than like a grown-ass woman. And I think as an adult reader, I found that a little bit irritating and hard to accept, but I can see why that's there for story reasons, and I think if I was a teenager, it wouldn't bother me so much. So 3.5 stars. I definitely want to continue on with the series. I think it's doing some really interesting things and could go some cool places. Okay, so then I also gave 3.5 stars to a book that I know some of you guys have been waiting to hear my thoughts on because of reasons, and that is A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. There has been quite a bit of controversy over this book, and people have had very mixed feelings on it. So probably the biggest issue in this is something that the author herself has publicly addressed, and so I'm going to talk about it here before I get into kind of my thoughts on the book. But there is a passage that she has since apologized for and plans to take out of future editions. Apparently it was kind of a last-minute addition to the text after having had sensitivity readers, and yeah, so the passage in question, and there are other concerns some people have, which, you know, you'll have to weigh the merits of those, but the main passage in question is one where it's talking about the world building, and it's talking about how there are these bugs that will live in hair and burrow into your brain. And specifically, this one says this is why a lot of people probably wouldn't want to have dreadlocks. Multiple problems with the way that that's being phrased, but obviously it ties into problematic stereotypes about the lock hairstyle as being dirty and unclean and has like racist undertones. So understandably, a lot of issues with this. I will say, having read the book and read it in context, I don't think the intent of the author was something negative or racist. That said, it still obviously is doing harm because of the way that it reads, regardless of intent. She should have written it differently, but one thing to know is it's not specifically targeting black hairstyles. This is a problem for anybody with longer hair, and in fact, it deals with class issues where people who are wealthy will actually typically have shaved heads all the time, and everybody tries to keep their hair shorter so that you don't get these like deathly bugs. So just kind of an FYI on that. I appreciate the fact that the author recognized that she made a mistake. She apologized publicly. It's getting removed from future editions. I guess I have one of the few that still has it, but that was an issue. There have been there are some people who have had other concerns, some of which I can kind of see, others of which I feel like are maybe kind of nitpicky, and I get the feeling that sometimes what's going on is there's people who just don't really like the book, and that's making these things stand out to them. You know, like sometimes when you're reading a book and you already don't like it, then you can get really nitpicky about all these other things that normally you probably wouldn't be bothered by. I feel like sometimes that's probably what's happening with A Deadly Education. Yeah. So this is a controversial one. I liked it, but I didn't love it, and I think there are people who are really gonna hate it. If you do not like the minutia of world building, you will probably think this book is really, really boring. And I've seen people say that. I get it. It definitely, part of what ranked it lower for me was the fact that it is very heavy on exposition. There's a lot of great world building going on, like she's figured out a lot of really cool stuff about the world, and it is an interesting, dark and brutal world inside this school. But did we need to know all of it? Did it all need to be kind of info dumped consistently throughout the book? No, probably not. Maybe some of that we could have learned in a smoother way that did more to develop the characters than just the world. Yeah, so I think some of the concerns people are having too is this is diverse on the surface. It's a magical school that draws students from all over the world, and there are people who are saying, well, she should have done a better job of making them more than just their name or their language or where they're from, which, fair enough. Like, could she have done more with that? Yes. What do I think that was the point of this book that's really heavily set up for the world that she's building in the Scholomance? No. So like I see the critique, but I also understand why she maybe didn't do that. I'll also talk about the main character. Some people are really going to hate the main character. I liked her a lot. I think she's really interesting. She's this prickly, unlikable female character who throws up walls a mile high and won't let people in, but inside is actually very soft and cares a lot about people and, you know, is scared of getting hurt. And so I loved her character arc. I liked seeing her development through the book and see things grow. There's a lot of action as well, but frequently like interrupted by these kind of info dumpy sections. So I gave it 3.5 stars. I would read on in the series. I think it's an interesting world. I think the characters are interesting. I think the themes that she's tackling here in terms of things like classism and privilege are also really interesting. Is it a perfect book? No, definitely not. Is it going to be for everybody? No. Like, I can totally see why there are people who are going to be like, nope, didn't like it, DNF'd it, it was so super boring. But there are going to be other people who are like, I'm really into this world that she's creating. I like this character. It just depends on the kind of reader you are. So there you go. For me, it was 3.5 stars. Am I sad that I got this beautiful special edition? No, I'm not, and thank goodness, because I was really worried there for a minute, guys. Moving on, let's talk about my 4-star reads. There were a lot of them this month. In fact, I gave 10 books 4 stars, and 6 of them I talked about in my mid-month wrap-up. The books I talked about in that video are Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roanhorse, Bonds of Justice by Nalini Singh, Brazen and the Beast by Sarah McLean, Each of Us a Desert by Marco Shiro, Over the Woodward Wall by A. Deborah Baker, aka Shauna McGuire, and The Haunting of Beatrix Green by Ash Parsons, Rachel Hawkins, and Victi Alvier Schechter. Again, if you want to hear about any of those books, check out my mid-month wrap-up. I also gave 4 stars to The Wedding Date Disaster by Avery Flynn. This is a enemies to lovers romantic comedy set around a family wedding, and I really enjoyed this. Definitely, especially near the ending, it can get quite melodramatic at times, so it wasn't like a perfect book, but I had a good time with it. I generally enjoyed it, and I would probably read more from Avery Flynn in the future. This is one that was also sent to me for review. In this book, our main character has asked her very wealthy guy best friend to be her fake date for a family wedding where she has kind of a large intrusive family to help provide a buffer. But when she goes to the airport to pick him up, instead she finds his evil twin brother, who she hates, but also they kind of have chemistry between them. And the evil twin brother is convinced that she is actually a gold digger trying to set up his brother and get him to marry her so she can get money, and he's determined to stop her. So they're kind of at odds with each other. Sparks fly, things develop. Of course, as many of these books do, this does have a kind of over-the-top misunderstanding that breaks up the relationship near the end before they finally get back together. It feels very much like it could be a movie. This would actually make a really probably great rom-com movie, but overall I had a pretty good time with it. Also, this one does get quite steamy. Gave it 4 stars. Then I also gave 4 stars to Instant Karma by Marissa Meyer. I know some of you guys have been waiting to see a review for this. Was this officially on my November TBR? Yes, it was. Did I decide to listen to it early because I had a NetGalley audio arc? Yes, I did. I listened to it early and I really, really liked it. This is another one that I feel like people are kind of polarized on. I was really a fan of it. This is Marissa Meyer's first time writing contemporary fiction, and this one is kind of straddles the line between like a coming of age story with a strong romantic element to it. I don't know that I would quite put it in the romance category because that's not the only or even primary plot, but there is a romance plot as part of it. The main character is a high school sophomore, I think, going into junior year, so she's probably around 15, and she's an overachiever who tends to be pretty judgmental of other people and has very high standards for academics and has been very frustrated with her slack-off lab partner who's caused her to get a bad grade on their joint report, and now he's refusing to redo it with her over the summer to help bring up her C. I'll be honest, I found her to be a very relatable character. She reminded me a lot of myself as a young teenager. And in a lot of reviews, I'm seeing people really don't like her. They're like, she's so mean and so terrible. And this is something that always bothers me. Excuse me, the kids got home, so if it's loud in the background, this is what we're doing. It always kind of bothers me when adult reviewers read books about young teenagers, especially teen girls, and expect them to be like mature adults. I mean, I, as a teenager, was very much like this character, and I know I'm not alone. I feel like a lot of teenagers are kind of self-centered and judgmental. Some are not. I'm sure some are perfectly nice people, but this is not uncommon, and she's 15. And she learns and she grows, and that's part of the plot arc. And I don't know, this is something that always irritates me, so I'm seeing a lot of like negative reviews that way, and I liked it. I thought it was relatable. I think this is something that is really going to appeal to teenagers who might see themselves in this, and she learns to be less judgmental and grows, and anyway. I thought it was a really solid book. The other thing that I want to say about this is I loved the family dynamics. You don't often see books with large families, and this had that and did it really, really well. I come from a pretty large family. I'm the oldest of 6 kids, and our main character is a twin who also has 3 younger sisters. So they come from a fairly large family. Her youngest sister is 4 years old. I thought that the behavior of the children was very much on point. The family dynamics for a large family were done really well, and I just kind of loved to see that too. So I was a fan. I gave it 4 stars. There you go. Then, because of a couple of you guys recommending this to me, and because it was available again from Audible Escape, I finally listened to my first book by Georgette Heyer. I read Catillon and I was super into it, and now I'm like going and buying more Georgette Heyer books because I think I'm really going to enjoy her. I don't know how I've never read from her before, but she's really interesting, and I read a little bit on her as an author. She lived in the UK and was writing in like the 1950s and is basically credited with creating the historical romance genre as we know it today. She's really big in terms of the origins of where that came from, and I can totally see it. Her work is very reminiscent of Jane Austen, so I think if you like Jane Austen, you'll probably enjoy Georgette Heyer, but it's got some of the like linguistic colloquialisms of the time she was writing, so like probably like the 40s and 50s, and it's really interesting. I enjoyed this a whole lot. It's not steamy, so if you prefer your romance without any steam, she might be a good one to pick up. And I just thought this was really fun and funny, and I loved the characters. I don't want to spoil too much about this, but the basic premise of Catillon is it follows a young woman who had been adopted by a wealthy man but doesn't have anything of her own, and he plans to leave her his entire fortune when he dies if she marries one of his nephews. And she doesn't want to do that. She wants to like get out of the country and go to London and experience the big city, and the way she schemes to do it is by having a fake engagement with one of these nephews. And so yeah, it's really fun. I had such a good time with it. Gave it 4 stars. I will for sure be picking up more from Georgette Heyer. this was a good one. So thank you to those of you who recommended it. Good recommendation. And the final book that I gave 4 stars to this month was Frost by Patrick D. Kaiser. This was sent to me by the author for review. He's an indie published author who writes novels in verse. You might remember that last month I read his debut novel and I was curious to see kind of how his writing would improve. This is his most recent one, and I've got to say, like, the writing is much improved. Like, you can definitely see an improvement in the verse and in the flow of the story. I think this is much, much better. So if the idea of a novel in verse appeals to you, this is definitely a very quick read, and I think conceptually it's an interesting one. It reimagines Jack Frost as a female criminal mastermind, and the main character is kind of her protege. And I don't want to say much more about this because, again, like, it's all written in verse, so this did not take me long to read at all, but I did like it. I think it's definitely a step up from earlier works, and I gave this one 4 stars. All right, moving on, let's talk about my 4.5 star reads. This month there were 2 of them, and one of them I talked about in my mid-month wrap-up, although I'm looking at this and I'm pretty sure in my head I had decided to change this to 5 stars instead of 4.5 stars, but I must not have updated my spreadsheet, so mental note to go and do that maybe when I'm editing this. But that book is Ring Shout by P. Jelly Clark. Again, this probably is actually going to be a 5-star read, but I did originally give it 4.5 stars. I talked about it in my mid-month wrap-up, so if you want to hear more, check out that video. And the other book that I gave 4.5 stars to was an e-arc from NetGalley. This is Black Witch Magic by Mila Nix. Okay, I really enjoyed this. This is an indie published paranormal romance that I kind of last minute decided to pick up, and I'm so glad I did. I really enjoyed this. What's funny to me about this book is that reading a lot of reviews afterwards, people would say things like, oh, this was such a light, fluffy read, and I think one review literally was saying something like, it's so great that some romances don't have to have big themes to them or making lots of points. And guys, look, what's really funny to me about that is that, yes, can you read this on the surface as a fun paranormal romance? Yes, you can, but also, if you're reading closely, it's very, very clear that there is a lot of subtext in this book about racism and microaggressions. So, I find it entertaining how many readers, like, didn't mention or didn't pick up on that who were reviewing this, but just know it's there. And I thought this was fantastic. I would definitely read more from this author. It was a fun, steamy romance, but it also has a lot of subtext to it that's doing really interesting things. So what's it about? The heroine is a curvy Black woman who works as a librarian during the day, but is secretly also a witch with a family curse that keeps her in this small town and ruins romantic relationships that she might try to have. Our hero is in town for the holidays, staying with his partner, not romantic partner, but business partner, because he is the skeptic side of a paranormal investigation team that has a sort of YouTube type show that they produce. And while he's there, he plans to investigate our heroine's family, of course, because people think that she's descended from these evil witches. And so, of course, a relationship develops. This does get a bit steamy. It's got this great relationship. I also think this does a pretty good job of having curvy or fat representation. I really enjoyed it. I liked the book. I liked the romance, but then there's also a lot of subtext going on here where many of the things that happen to our main character or things that she faces in her small, probably mostly white town, supposedly because she is descended from this family of evil witches, are clearly parallels to the types of microaggressions that Black people face for being Black. And so there's a lot of that going on. It's also interesting reading the arc of the hero because part of him having to grapple with and coming to terms with the existence of witches, the way that it's written parallels a lot of the things that the white partner in an interracial relationship might have to grapple with in terms of accepting the realities of some of the things that their partner faces on a regular basis. And not to be too specific because I don't really want to spoil anything, but the big bad of the story is a self-righteous white woman. So, like, it's funny to me that people are reading this as like, oh, it's just a fluffy holiday romance. It is set between like Christmas and New Year's mostly, so it is kind of a holiday romance, but I'm like, well, yeah, but like not really. So I really liked it. I gave it 4.5 stars. I think it's well worth checking out. Oh my gosh. Guys, this is gonna be such a long video. Oh my god. I gotta like speed it up, man. Okay, so this month, so moving on to my 5-star reads, I had 8 books that got 5 stars, and 2 of them I talked about in my mid-month wrap-up. Only 2. Oh man, like I have so much still to talk about. Okay, so the books that I talked about there are Cia Martinez and the Moonlit Beginning of Everything by Raquel Vasquez Jaliland, and Crazy Stupid Bromance by Alyssa K. Adams. Again, if you want to hear about those, check out my mid-month wrap-up. I'm gonna group these together, but I also gave 5 stars to 2 Courtney Milan books in the Brothers Sinister series. Again, these were on Audible Escape, and I wanted to finish up the series. I am just loving Courtney Milan. She is quickly becoming one of my favorite historical romance authors. Seriously, she's great. The books that I read from her this month are The Countess Conspiracy and The Suffragette Scandal. And The Suffragette Scandal is the final book in that series. I'm not gonna like go into too much detail because again, there's a lot of books to talk about here, but in general, I just think Courtney Milan writes fantastic historical romances with strong, smart heroines, strong heroes who are not alpha males, and I love the fact that she does not erase the existence of people of color and queer people from history, because yes, they did exist during that time period. Also, if you guys have been liking the Evie Dunmore series, you should really read The Suffragette Scandal because it has similar things it's doing and in my opinion does it better. So that's a thing. We can just call me a Courtney Milan fangirl now, basically. I'm gonna want to like go read all of her stuff. But yeah, 5 stars to both of these. They were just very much my deal. And I guess what I will tell you about them is The Countess Conspiracy features a main character who is a scientist but doesn't get public recognition for her work. A man does, and that was not uncommon during that time period, and I loved the way that it tackled some of those issues. So that's the thing too, Courtney Milan writes really great thematic content. The Suffragette Scandal, of course, our main character is a suffragette who runs a women's publication and owns her own business, and they're great. If you want to hear more details, I do have reviews on Goodreads, but yeah, I thought they were fantastic. I also gave 5 stars to Daughters of Jubilation by Carolee Corthran. This one was an e-arc from NetGalley. It's a YA, I would actually call it like a historical horror fantasy, kind of. It went much more in the horror direction than what I was expecting, and it was very good, but it ended up being quite dark and really intense and like a lot. Like I almost cried. I like teared up. I didn't full on cry because I rarely cry in books, but like I was emotional. It was a lot. Like probably a lot of people will read this and cry. So it's intense. Check content and trigger warnings if you need them because there are a lot of them. Specifically, it does deal with rape and confronting having been sexually abused as a child, as well as a lot of violence, racial violence, and yeah, it's a lot. So just, you know, be aware of what you're getting into. But it's beautifully written, and there's also a lot of joy in the page, and the ending is mixed. The ending is bittersweet is the way to put it. This is set in the American South in the 1960s, and it follows a black teen girl with these sort of witchy magical abilities that have been passed down from woman to woman as a means of survival. And so this does touch a bit on slavery, but this specifically is in the Jim Crow era South. And in some ways, it's a coming-of-age story. She gets her first boyfriend and falls in love and explores her sexuality, and it's very sex-positive for the first time, but there is a darkness and there are horror elements, and it gets really intense. So I won't say too much more than that. It was much darker than I was expecting, but I also thought it was really, really good and well worth your time. So 5 stars for Daughters of Jubilation. Okay, all right, give me hugs. Ugh. Love you. It got hurt. I'm sorry you got hurt. Then I read a nonfiction book this month that I gave 5 stars to. This is called Sisters in Hate, American Women on the Front Lines of White Nationalism by Seward Darby. So this I actually had on my radar because of Mara over at Books Like Whoa, and I listened to this as an audio copy from my library. It's a lot to listen to, but it's also very, very good. It's very well done. It's written by a journalist who spent years basically interviewing and investigating women in white nationalism in America. And it primarily follows the stories of 3 women with very different backgrounds and kind of shows how they ended up in white nationalism and what they found appealing about it. It's a lot, like it's really intense. And also know, if you're listening to the audiobook, you do get kind of a flurry even in the prologue of racial slurs, including the N-word. They're quotes from other people, but like there is a lot of a lot of intense language and things in here. So this is not like easy or light to read, but I think it's really well done. It's really eye-opening. And yeah, I think it does a good job of giving you an idea of part of what might be appealing to people and of the significant role that women play in these organizations, in promoting their ideals, in recruiting to them, and kind of the insidiousness of it. So I did give this 5 stars. I think it is well worth your time, but just kind of know what you're getting into. Okay, 2 more books to talk about. First up, I gave 5 stars to Kiss of Snow by Nalini Singh. This is book 10 in the Psy Changeling series. Like I said, you've seen 3. I read, I guess, 8, 9, and 10 this month on Audible Escape. Kiss of Snow was so good. Definitely among my favorites of the series. I thought this was just really great, and it's been a long time coming. This is Hawk and Sienna's story. Those of you who know the series know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I just loved everything about this. I loved the way their relationship developed. I was really into the external political things that are starting to get set up here, and I'm curious to see where that plot arc is going to go. So yeah, easy 5 stars. Kiss of Snow was great, and I may have ordered myself a copy because it's one of the ones that I would like to own in my collection. So definitely a good one. And the final book that I gave 5 stars to this month is This Is Not the Jess Show by Anna Carey. This is the one that got pushed back to 2021. I think this is now coming out in February, I want to say. And I should actually be getting a finished copy of this from the publisher sometime soon, which is exciting as well. But I really, really liked this a lot. It was exactly what I was hoping it was going to be. For those of you who are old enough to have seen The Truman Show, the movie with Jim Carrey, this is basically a YA updated kind of version of that. That's what I was hoping it was going to be, and that was what it was. It was great. It was really fun, and I think really relevant. I can't say too much without spoiling things, but if you want to see spoilers on what I thought was interesting about the thematic content here, check out my Goodreads review, which again is linked down below. But I think the commentary in this book is really interesting subtextually, especially given like what I do. Anyway, I won't say too much more about it. I thought it was really interesting. The main character is a 17-year-old girl who lives in a small town. She's coping with the fact that her younger sister has a life-threatening disease. She has a crush on a boy she's known for years, and she's got best friends and high school drama and is just coping with all of that. But weirder and weirder things keep happening in her small town, and she doesn't know what to make of it. And then one day, one of her best friends drops something out of her backpack. It's a sleek, rectangular device that she's never seen before. But the year is 1998, and the first iPhone won't be invented for another 8 years. So that's kind of the setup here, and it was great. It kind of went exactly where I expected it to go, but I thought it did it really, really well, and I really liked the ending too. Apparently some people didn't like the ending. I guess this maybe would be a duology. I would be open to continuing on, but honestly I'm also pretty satisfied with where this left us. So 5 stars for me. Thank you to Quirk Books for sending this. It was great. It was really fun. So I was a fan. Okay, lastly, my 6-star reads. These are the books that I'm considering favorites of the year or favorites of all time. And this month I had 4 of them, which is super exciting and wild and not something that typically happens. 3 of them I talked about in my mid-month wrap-up. Those books are Beyond the Ruby Veil by Mara Fitzgerald, Home Before Dark by Riley Sager, and Spoiler Alert by Olivia Dade. Really, really loved all 3 of these. Gonna be putting them right behind me on my favorite shelf, and if you want to hear detailed thoughts on them, check out my mid-month wrap-up. And my final 6-star read of the month, and I'm gonna tell you guys, best adult fantasy of 2020. Yep. This is Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. So freaking good, guys. This was amazing. I'm a little bummed. So I listened to this actually initially on audio because I had it from Libra FM. So thank you so much to them. Again, check them out below if you're interested. I had ordered this from the UK and the package came damaged, and so the book is a little damaged. It could be worse, but like if you notice it, that's why. But guys, this was so good. I did read Trail of Lightning finally this month, which I'd been meaning to read for a long time, and I liked that one. But if you were not a fan of Trail of Lightning, please do not let that discourage you from picking up Black Sun, because it is completely different. This is epic high fantasy with amazing world building, incredible characters. It's a multi-POV book. It gets quite dark. It's got great diverse representation. It's got awesome twists and turns and really good storytelling. And the world is inspired by pre-Columbian American and South American cultures like Aztec and Maya, which is really fascinating. I don't even want to say too much more about this because I feel like it's an experience, but it starts off pretty brutally with like a bang and just does not let up. The pacing of this was amazing. The character work was amazing. Like I literally have zero complaints about this book, which never happens. Like I think I practically never have nothing to complain about. I thought this just did everything brilliantly, and I cannot wait to see where the next book goes. It has kind of a cliffhanger ending, and like, guys, this was so good. So good. Easily the best adult fantasy I've read this year. So yeah. Go read it. It does get dark. So check content and trigger warnings if you need them, because there's a lot of them. But yeah, loved it so much. It was great. So there you go. Those are the 34 books that I read in the month of October. Oh, and I think I forgot to mention this, even though it was on my slides, but my average rating for the month was over 4 stars as well. You would have probably seen it on the slides, but yeah, really, really good. Some new favorites. Great reads. It's just been such a good reading month, and I think the fact that I've been enjoying so many things is kind of like keeping the pace up. So here's hoping November is also a strong reading month. Talk to me in the comments down below. Let me know any of your thoughts or feelings on anything I talked about today. And for your question of the day, let's talk about reading challenges for the year. Where are you at? I officially set my Goodreads challenge at 150 books. I like to set it low, but like in my head, my goal was 300 books, which shockingly I've already crossed. Like, that is wild to me. Do you have a challenge for yourself? Do you have an idea of how many books you want to read every year? Or do you prefer to just like not have that as a stressor? Like, I know some people find that really stressful and other people find it to be fun. It varies a lot. So let me know how you approach that in the comments down below. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.